Hi everyone, I'm Bodhisattva and welcome back to the third of our four discussions on the Visuddhimagga. And the first of these discussions we did a bit of an introduction, historical background and so on. Second one we looked at Visuddhimagga teachings on sila or ethics, and today we're going to be looking at samadhi. Now for the teachings on samadhi, we have a much longer, richer, more interesting, more complex section than we had on the section of ethics. And so I'm going to have to skip over a lot more material and just sort of go through some of the highlights. By the way, I do apologize if you can hear a knocking in the background. This is the sound of our neighbors pounding spices. Very similar, in fact, to the discussion of some of the impediments of a monastery, the noises around. Okay, so, there we go. Spices are pounded. So, we're going to have a look at this discussion on samadhi. Now, the discussion on samadhi is incredibly influential. It has shaped our modern experience of meditation in dramatic and unequaled ways. It has been in many ways the blueprint of what we understand meditation to be. It's debatable to what extent the Theravada tradition had an ongoing meditation tradition in a recognizable sense coming into the modern era. Our modern meditation schools, the Burmese Vipassana schools, as well as the Thai forest tradition, more or less trace back to the middle or late 19th century. And it doesn't really seem possible in a meaningful way to trace them back as living meditation traditions. And there's nothing on meditation in between this treatise in the Visuddhimagga and modern day. There's really not much in the Theravada tradition written about meditation. This stands in dramatic contrast to, well, pretty much literally any other contemplative tradition, whether the Zen tradition, Chinese Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, or non-Buddhist traditions, Hindu traditions, Sufi traditions, Christian meditation traditions. In all of those places, when people were meditating, they had powerful experiences and they wanted to talk about those experiences and share them. And yet we find in the Theravada tradition essentially nothing after the Visuddhimagga, nor do we find anything mentioned in archaeological record, nor when we do find meditation mentioned, does it give us faith that what people were doing was what we would recognize as a meditation practice. Texts from the sort of medieval period in Theravadan countries, like the Jhana or the Yoga manual, seem rather more like tantric invocations of meditation states rather than what we would think of as meditation. The Thai forest traditions, one of the kind of mythologies of Ajahn Mun and the teachers of his generation, was that they went back to the teachings in the suttas, which Ajahn Mun discussed with his friend Upali, and the teachings on anapanasati, mindfulness of the parts of the body, impermanence, and so on, which today we universally recognize as the key canonical meditations, that there was a restoration of these practices. What prevailed before that time in terms of meditation was likely things more in the nature of magical invocations, black magic perhaps, or white magic. So I don't want to say that, it's different. We can't really say that there wasn't any meditation before the modern era in Theravada, but we can certainly say that the evidence for what we would recognize as canonical Buddhist meditation in Theravada is slim at best. And much of what we know of as meditation was reconstituted by consultation with the texts, including, of course, the suttas. But the primary core text that really shapes what we think of meditation being about comes from this chapter in the Visuddhimagga. So as such, whether you have heard of it or not, or whether you've read it or not, it influences you. It shapes the way that you meditate. It shapes the assumptions that you bring to it. And many of the terminologies, ideas that we have about meditation are drawn from the Visuddhimagga, for better or for worse. Of course, there are a lot of people these days who criticize the Visuddhimagga, who point out that there are many things there that are not found in the suttas. And they argue that the Visuddhimagga is teaching a fundamentally different kind of meditation than is found in the suttas. I'm not one of those people. I don't think that there's a fundamental difference between what the Visuddhimagga is teaching and what the suttas are teaching. I think that there are obviously new ideas and expansions brought in which aren't found in the suttas. That's the job of a commentary, to do that. And obviously you can take exception or debate certain points and certain interpretations, and I certainly think that there are plenty of things in the Visuddhimagga's exposition which I would disagree with, but it's a different thing to say that one has points of disagreement, to say that you're talking about a fundamentally different kind of meditation. So what I would like to do in this talk today is to look at, give a brief overview of some of the important parts of the chapter. I will more or less pick and choose a few paragraphs according to what I think is interesting and important. There is much there which I will just have to skip over, and we can discuss some of those in the discussion if you'd like. But for now, let's just plunge right into it and have a look at some of the things here. Okay, let's begin with the basic definition, chapter 3.3. In what sense is it concentration? It is concentration, samadhi, in the sense of concentrating, samadhana. This is a mere verbal resolution of the term. Notice, of course, I personally don't like the rendering concentration for samadhi. I think it's actually incorrect, and I use immersion these days. But I'll go along with Jnanamoli's usage, otherwise it'll be confusing. So what is this concentrating? It is the centering, adhana, of consciousness and consciousness concomitants. Consciousness concomitants is a technical term in Abhidhamma, essentially meaning those aspects of mental activity which are associated with consciousness or awareness itself, so things like feeling, perception, and so on. Centering of consciousness and consciousness concomitants evenly, that's samang, and rightly, samma, on a single object. Placing is what is meant. So it is the state in virtue of which consciousness and its concomitants remain evenly and rightly on a single object, undistracted and unscattered, that should be understood as concentrating. All right, so this is the basic definition. Let's move on now. So under there's a description on 3.5 about how many kinds of concentration. Chapter 3.4, concentration has non-distraction as its characteristic. Okay. Its function is to eliminate distraction. It is manifested as non-wavering. Because of the words, being blissful, his mind becomes concentrated, which quote from the suttas, its proximate cause is bliss. So this is the definition or characterization of it in terms of the characteristic, function, manifestation, and proximate cause. We saw this earlier with sila, and in this case with samadhi, and it's very quite a handy and quite a useful little exegetical framework there. Okay. How many kinds of concentration are there? So this is now 3.5. I won't go through all of these, but I will just note a few which are of interest. It is of two kinds, as access and absorption. So this is here introducing the very important distinction between access concentration or sometimes called threshold concentration or neighborhood concentration, upachara samadhi, and absorption or appana samadhi. That distinction, of course, not found in the suttas, and the idea of access concentration is a new introduction. There's no parallel to the idea of access concentration in the suttas at all. So that's, I think, a major exegetical problem with this whole chapter, and it needs to be really borne in mind that there's a whole, this concept is very fundamental, it's brought back to again and again, and yet it's not really found in the suttas at all. So this, I think, is a major problem. Notice that in modern day meditation circles, they will usually divide concentration into three kinds: khanika samadhis, momentary samadhi, access, and appana. The Visuddhimagga is not putting a huge amount of emphasis on the idea of khanika samadhi, a momentary concentration. The very idea of momentary concentration is a bit weird, since the whole point of samadhi is to be not distracted. But the nature and relationship between those two, khanika and upachara samadhi, is a bit complex or a bit ambiguous. Sometimes they seem to be like three stages in development of samadhi. Other times, khanika samadhi is depicted as if it's like a kind of a variant way of doing upachara samadhi. Without going into that in too much detail, but just to notice that if you're familiar with that threefold definition, then that's not really emphasized here in the Visuddhimagga. It is found in the commentaries, but it's not emphasized much here. Okay. Three kinds, happiness, 4 kinds. Okay, so another one which is introduced here is the number 11 as limited and with limited object, paritaramana. And this idea of the aramana we'll return to again, but this is another new introduction not found in the suttas. Suttas don't have the word object. Ramana is not used in the same sense anywhere in the suttas, nor is the concept found in the suttas. So it's important to understand this word object, which pervades the language of modern meditation, is not found in the suttas at all. And I think that's, personally, I believe that is the most significant shift between the sutta teachings on meditation and the Visuddhimagga or Abhidhamma teachings on meditation. And I think that the false notion of the object, the idea that a meditation is based on something which is objective, like a kasina, for example, as a literal physical object, is a major step towards making meditation not about something which is subjective, about something which is about nurturing your experience, but it's something about which is accomplishing some kind of objective task. And the shift from a relational and emotional connection, which is what the suttas are talking about, to the performance of a feat of concentration, I think is probably the single most harmful concept introduced in the Visuddhimagga's discussion on meditation. Far more so than any of the things which are normally cited as being controversial. Okay, moving along. What else have we got? Okay, so, the other distinction which is found here, not found in the suttas, number 3, which I skipped over, is mundane and supramundane. That's lokiya and lokuttara. This is a concept which is introduced primarily in the Abhidhamma and drawn out here. The basic idea here is that lokiya refers to the jhanas, the ordinary jhanas that you get when you meditate and you get into a jhana. Lokuttara is the jhanas that are specifically associated with the occasion of realizing the paths and fruits. So technically, according to Abhidhamma, the Lokuttara jhana only occurs at a certain, like 4 mind moments or something like that. Something like specific things. It's not really a state of meditation that you develop. It's a flash where the mind enters this very purified state and realizes the truths. That state can be reviewed and re-entered, but the moment of realizing it just takes a few mind moments. That concept is very problematic. Like I said, it's drawn from the Abhidhamma, although significantly developed since then. But the distinction between Lokiya and Lokuttara makes a huge difference, because it then opens a pathway to be able to say that, well, you don't really need jhanas. And this became a major discussion in the controversy in the Theravadan world in the 50s and 60s, when the Burmese were promoting this idea that you don't really need jhanas. This was an unprecedented idea. And the others, including a number of the Sinhalese Mahatheras, were objecting and arguing back against this, pointing out that jhanas are so central in the suttas. And one of the sort of points that the Burmese teachers were making was that if you divide the meditation into Lokiya and Lokuttara, then you can get enlightened just by experiencing these Lokuttara jhanas, which only happen for a mind moment. And so you don't need to develop these kind of actual jhanas. That, of course, only makes sense if you accept the theoretical framework of the Abhidhamma and the commentaries. In the suttas, there's no such distinction. The jhanas that we use, the normal everyday jhanas that we talk about, the, if you like, common or garden variety jhanas, which are by no means common or garden variety, but they are the Eightfold Path, and that's what leads to Nibbana. That's what the Buddha said is essential for developing the path. So even though these ideas were seized on in later years and used as a way of getting around the requirement for jhana here in the Visuddhimagga, obviously, a very large part of the text is talking about jhanas and talking about how to get them and how to develop them and how to realize them. So, when thinking about the tradition, I think it's really important to retain that sense of perspective. It certainly is not the case that the normal position within the commentarial literature is that you don't need jhanas. Obviously, the mainstream normal position of the Theravadan commentaries is that jhanas are a central and essential part of development of the path. Okay. Now, limited object, development 3.28. So let's go on to 3.28. We have a summary of how to develop the meditation. Mundane concentration, Lokiya samadhi, should be developed by one who has taken his stand on virtue. Okay, so you have your sila. It's quite purified in the way already stated in the first chapter. He should sever any of the 10 impediments that he may have. Okay, severing impediments. He should then approach a good friend, the giver of a meditation subject, and he should apprehend from among the 40 meditation subjects one that suits his own temperament. After that, he should avoid a monastery unfavorable to the development of samadhi and go to live in one that is favorable. Then he should sever the lesser impediments and not overlook any of the directions for development. This is in brief and goes on to discuss it in a lot more detail. And it's a really good discussion. And there's so many nice things in there. I'm going to run out of time very quickly if I go through all of these things, but I'll just read a few little stories and a few little bits and pieces here. Okay, so here's one about the first one about the first impediments is the impediment of a dwelling. And this is something that I know very well as a monk, as a bhikkhu, that when you leave home and you come and stay in the monastery, even though we let go of our attachment to that home life, it's very easy to substitute that for the attachment to the monastery. You can see many monasteries, of course, are very beautiful places and they're very lovely places to live, so it's easy to get attached. 2 clansmen left Anuradhapura, it seems, and eventually went forth at the Tuparama. So this is like a huge, massive monastery at Anuradhapura, the capital city of Sri Lanka at the time, elsewhere described in these kind of glowing terms as being a center of wealth and civilization. One of them made himself familiar with the 2 codes, Chupanimokkha's, and then when he had acquired 5 years seniority, he took part in the Pavarana ceremony at the end of the rains and left for the place called Pachina Kandaraji. The other stayed on where he was, in the Tuparama, in the big monastery. Now, when the one who had gone to Pachina Kandaraji had lived there a long time and had become an elder, that is, been a monk for 10 years, this place is good for retreat, he thought. Perhaps I told my friend about it. So he set out. And in due course, he entered the Tuparama. So one friend went and stayed in the forest monastery, and one of them stayed in the big monastery in the city. As he entered, the elder of the same seniority saw him, his old friend, went to meet him, took his bowl and robe, and did the duties for him. These are the duties for a visiting monk or visiting nun, which are detailed in the Chulawagga of the Vinaya Pitaka, and it's a very nice aspect of the Vinaya, actually, the level of care and attention which the Sangha is supposed to look after each other, and especially to look after wanderers and travellers. The visiting elder went to his lodging. Then he thought, now my friend will be sending me ghee or molasses or a drink, for he has lived long in this city. He got nothing that night. And in the morning he thought, now he will be sending me rice gruel and solid food sent by his supporters. When he saw none, he thought, there's no one to bring it. No doubt they will give it when we go into the town. Early in the morning they went into the town together. When they had wandered through one street and got only a ladle full of gruel, they sat down in a sitting hall to drink it. Then the visitor thought, perhaps there is no individual giving of gruel. So also it's worth noticing that in those days it was taken for granted that the monks would, even at the big monasteries in the city, were going for alms. A practice that still prevails throughout Thailand and Myanmar, but unfortunately has mostly lapsed in Sri Lanka. Then the visitor thought, perhaps there is no individual giving as gruel, but as soon as it's time for the meal, people will give special food. But when it was time for the meal, they ate what they had got by wandering for alms. And the visitor said, Venerable Sir, how is this? Do you live in this way all the time? Yes, friend. Venerable Sir, Patina Kandaraji is comfortable. Let us go there. Now, as the elder came out from the city by the southern gate, he took the Kumbhakarakama road. The visitor asked, but why, Venerable Sir, why do you take this road? Did you not recommend Pachina Kandaraji, friend? But how is this, Venerable Sir? Have you no extra belongings in the place you have lived for so long? They set out on the road, he hasn't got anything with him. I said, that is so, friend. The bed and chair belonging to the Sangha, and they are put away as usual. There is nothing else. But Venerable Sir, I have left my staff and my oil tube and my sandal bag there. Have you already collected so much, friend? Living there for just one day. Yes, Venerable Sir. He was glad in his heart and he paid homage to the elder. For those like you, Venerable Sir, everywhere is a forest dwelling. The Tuparama is a place where the relics of the 4 Buddhas are deposited. There is a suitable hearing of the Dhamma in the brazen palace. There is a great shrine to be seen and one can visit elders. It is like the time of the Buddha. It is here that you should live. On the following day, he took his bowl and outer robe and went away by himself. So dwelling is no impediment for one like that. So there you go. It's a very nice story showing this kind of the inversion of what you might expect. You might expect the monk in the forest is living a life of having very little, and the one in the city is used to luxuries, but it turns out not to be quite like that. And anyway, nice story. Nice story. And a number of different stories about that, which are kind of showing the, I guess, nuances and events that happen in monastic life. Another one which I think is also interesting is that one should sever the impediment of kin. Sounds fairly drastic. It's kin in the case of the monastery is a teacher, co-resident pupil, so on and so forth, one with the same teacher, friends and so on. In the house it means mother, father, brother and so on. One needs to sever the impediment. When they are sick, they are an impediment to him. Oh, what do you do? Therefore, that impediment should be severed by curing them with nursing. Oh, okay. That sounds, when I read that, I was like, oh, this sounds a bit harsh, right? You're going to leave your sick relatives behind. Oh, no, you actually look after them until they're better, and then that's it. So anyway, there you go. Right, moving on. Okay, so there's the impediment of books and of teachings, and there's a number of different teachings about that. And here's a nice one, which also I think gives some revealing background as to the culture at the time, the monastic culture. In the great monastery, this is also in Anuradhapura, the elder Tipitaka Jula Abhaya had the golden drums struck, saying, I shall expound the 3 Pitakas in the circle of experts in the 5 collections of the discourses. All right. And this was before, it sounds a bit like the debating culture you get in Tibetan monasteries these days. This was before he had learnt the commentaries. So he's basically telling everyone he's an expert in the suttas, but he hasn't learnt the commentaries. The community of bhikkhus said, which teacher's teaching is it? That is, what is the commentarial literature, the Atthakatha, Acharya Parampara? Unless you give the teaching of your own teachers, we shall not let you speak. Also, his preceptor asked him when he went to wait on him, did you have the drum beaten, friend? Yes, Venerable Sir. For what reason? I shall expound the scriptures, Venerable Sir. Venerable friend Abhaya, how do the teachers explain this passage? They explain it in this way, Venerable Sir. The elder dissented, saying, Again, 3 times, each in a different way. He said they explained it in this way, Venerable Sir, and the elder always dissented, saying, Then he said, friend, your first explanation was the way of the teachers, but it is because you have not actually learnt it from the teacher's lips that you are unable to maintain that the teachers say such and such. Go and learn it from our teachers. Interesting objection there, right? His explanation was actually correct, but because he couldn't back it up by referring to the commentary, then it's felt to be lacking authority or lacking weight. So you should go and learn the commentary. There's an elder called Mahadhammarakkhita living in the Tula Dahara Pabata monastery in the Rohana country beyond the Mahaveli river. He knows all the scriptures, go to him. So he went with 500 bhikkhus to Maharakhita and to learn the Dhamma, and Maharakhita says, friend Abhaya, they ask me about the Digha and the Madhyama from time to time, but I have not looked at the others for 30 years. Still, you may repeat them in my presence by night, and I shall explain them to you by day. He said, good, Venerable Sir, and he acted accordingly. The inhabitants of the village had a large pavilion built at the door of his dwelling, and they came daily to hear the Dhamma, explaining by day what had been repeated by night. The elder Dhammarakkhita eventually completed the instruction. So the student is reciting the suttas, and then the teacher is then teaching him the commentary, the Atthakatha on that, and this kind of back and forth learning process. So when the instruction was completed, seems like they went through all of the Tripitaka perhaps, then Venerable Dhammarakkhita, the teacher, sat down on a mat on the ground before the elder Abhaya and said, friend, explain a meditation subject to me. What are you saying, Venerable Sir? Have I not heard it all from you? What can I explain to you that you do not already know? The senior elder said, this path is different for one who has actually travelled by it. The Venerable Abhaya was then, it seems, a stream enterer. So the student was a stream enterer, but the teacher was not. And so having learnt all of the textbooks, then the teacher had the humility to recognize the spiritual and the meditative attainment of his student and to humbly ask for teachings from him. When the elder Abhaya had given his teacher a meditation subject, he returned to Anuradhapura. Later, when he was expounding the Dhamma in the brazen palace, he heard that the elder had obtained Nibbana. On hearing this, he said, bring me my robe, friends. He put on the robe and said, the Arahant path befits our teacher, friends. Our teacher was a true thoroughbred. He sat down on a mat before his own Dhamma's pupil and said, explain a meditation subject to me. The Arahant path befits our teacher, friends. For such as these, books are no impediment. So again, pointing out that while these things like dwellings and possessions and books and study and so on can be an impediment, but of course it depends on your attitude towards them and your character. So another nice story there. All right, let us proceed. There's a beautiful chapter on the good friend, which comes up, which I won't go on to for lack of time, but again, it really kind of emphasizes the humility of the student. So this is especially sections number 66 onwards. He should, when the student arrives at the teacher's monastery, he should not say, explain a meditation subject to me, Venerable Sir, on the very day he arrives. But starting from the next day, he can, if the teacher has a habitual attendant, ask his permission to do the duties. If he does not allow it when asked, they can be done when the opportunity offers. When he does them, And then he goes on to talk about the different duties that he's doing. And so this is the attitude of the student to the teacher. And one of the things which I might just sort of say is that in the modern day, a lot of that attitude to me seems to really kind of be lost, and the attitude of a student to the teacher is much more, what can I get from the teacher? And I'm coming here because I need my thing, I need my peace of mind, I need my meditation, I need my jhanas or whatever, and it's the teacher's job to make that happen for me. And that beautiful kind of humility and idea of service as being an essential prerequisite for the path and development of meditation seems to be lost. And this is one of the things that I find often happens in modern day meditation, is that people are more than willing to sort of leap onto the highest dhammas and start talking about enlightenment and jhanas and all of these kinds of things, but somehow they've skipped over just about all of the preliminary work that's actually leading up to that path. And to me, I don't find that very plausible. If somebody's talking about jhanas and enlightenment and all of these kinds of things, my attitude is, well, may it be so, friend, may it be so. But I don't really take it very seriously, because I don't see a lot of people actually doing that groundwork that would lead to the development of those states. Okay. Now, moving along, we then have in section number 3.74 the description of the different kinds of temperaments, the 6 kinds of temperaments: greedy, hating, deluded, faithful, intelligent, and speculative. And that discussion, again, is a very interesting one. I won't go into it now. It's not particularly conceptually difficult or complicated. It's a nice read. And it's an interesting sort of, I guess, early or sort of pioneering attempt at like a behavioral typology, behavioral description of different human types, and a application of meditation in a way that's suitable for that. We mentioned at the beginning that in many ways Visuddhimagga is a handbook for meditation teachers. And you can see how this kind of thing would be very useful for a meditation teacher to notice the kinds of behaviors in particular students, and to meditate and to recommend approaches to meditation that were going to respond to those states. And of course, this is a new teaching. It's not found in the suttas at all, but it's building up from ideas which are found very prominently in the suttas. The suttas also talk about different types of people and their approach to meditation. It talks about the use of specific meditations as antidotes for specific kinds of issues, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is the different kinds of temperament. Now, number 3.104, skipping ahead a bit, we have the enumeration of the different kinds of meditation. And here we have the famous list of 40 meditation objects, so using the Visuddhimagga's own language here. The 10 kasinas, which Nyanamoli has correctly translated here as totalities. He normally doesn't translate it, but the actual meaning of kasina is totality. It does not mean a physical disc. The 10 kinds of foulness, asubha, the recollection of the ugliness of the body or the ugliness of the parts of the body. The 10 recollections, the recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the recollection of one's precepts, of generosity, the devas, recollection of death, and so on. The 4 divine abidings, very famous Brahma Viharas, metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. The 4 immaterial states, the arupa attainments. Notice that in the suttas they don't call the arupa attainments jhanas, but in the commentaries they sometimes do. 1 perception and 1 defining. And the perception is, I forgot what perception is. And then the next chapter lists what all of these are. The perception is perception of repulsiveness and nutriment. All right, ahara, patikule, sanya. And the defining is the defining of the 4 elements. Now, I'm not going to go into the passage on the 4 elements here because it's too long, but I would just remark that it is a remarkable and very interesting passage, and one of the most interesting parts of the whole Visuddhimagga. Okay, so this is just the basic enumeration of different kinds of meditation. Now, of course, as we mentioned in a previous discussion, the Visuddhimagga, following on from the Dhammasangani in listing the kasinas at the beginning, and thus giving a quite dramatic shift of emphasis from this meditation, which is a fairly marginal one in the suttas, now has pride of place. And the way that kasina meditation is taught in the Visuddhimagga in part shapes the language and perception of all the other meditation objects. Because it's at the beginning, so the detailed explanation is there. All right. 3.104, then next is 3.126. 3.126, I'll just remark in passing. If a student is not doing the right thing, then the teacher will not teach him the Dhamma and so on, and does not train him in the cryptic books. Okay. I don't know what that says. There's a footnote there which tells you something, but I don't know what the cryptic books really are. The next, on the same page, section 128, 3.128, it's also interesting because there's a substantial passage talking about the bodhisattvas. 6 kinds of inclination lead to the maturing of the enlightenment of the bodhisattvas. With the inclination of non-greed, bodhisattvas see the fault in greed, and so on. Interesting reference to the bodhisattvas, somewhat unusual for, in the Visuddhimagga, and quite matter of fact, right? He's not sort of making any big deal about it, and curious that whole passage appears to be unattributed. Nyanamoli just has a pair of empty brackets. I'm not sure if any other scholarship has identified that passage or if we know where it comes from. Okay. So moving along, this is the end more or less of the first chapter, and we move now to the description of the earth kasina as such. Okay, so again, I'm going to skip over most of the details and the details of what makes a good monastery. Important, but I'll skip over it. I'll also skip over the instructions on how to make an earth kasina. Again, interesting discussion. I mean, it's interesting how specific and material and physical it is. It's giving you very, very specific instructions on how to do that. And chapter 4.23, there's quite a significant concept introduced there, which is that if you have practiced the earth kasina in your past life, then you can give rise to that meditation quite naturally without having to construct an object to use for your meditation. But if you haven't practiced it in your past life, this is why you need that more specialized object as support. And I think that's interesting because that's showing, I think it's showing like a reflection of the fact that in meditators' experience, it's quite common for people to have like spontaneous meditation experiences like the bodhisattva had when he was sitting under the rose apple tree and went into first jhana. And I think that kind of thing happens fairly often actually. And here it's saying that this is because you practiced in your past life. Okay. Chapter 4.26 also has an interesting detail. When you're sitting outside to do the meditation on the kasina, then you should sit yourself on a well-covered chair with legs a span and 4 fingers high. So the basic instruction on meditation has you sitting on a chair, which is good news for those of us with bad knees. One of the reasons why I say never dismiss the Visuddhimagga. Okay. So according to this, for the kasina meditation, you sit outside, you prepare it and you do it, you sit there until you get the preliminary image of the earth kasina, and then once that is done, then you actually get up from your seat and move inside your hut to complete the meditation. Another significant concept that's introduced here is the idea that at the beginning of the meditation, that you should do some preliminary reflections to set the direction of the mind and uplift the mind before beginning the meditation. After seating in the way stated, he should review the dangers in sense desires. In the way beginning sense desires give little enjoyment. So this is like recollecting a sutta passage. And then arouse longing for the escape from sense desires, for renunciation. He should next arouse joy of happiness by recollecting the special qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and then awe by thinking, now, this is the way of renunciation entered upon by all Buddhas, Pacceka Buddhas, and noble disciples, and then eagerness by thinking, in this way, I should surely come to know the taste of the bliss of seclusion. So this is, again, a very common practice in modern meditation, and done in various ways. It's not necessarily done in exactly the same way it's talked about there, but the idea that when you begin the meditation, that you start with doing some reflections to uplift and direct your mind. It's not really found in the suttas in the same way, and it's drawn from this passage in the Visuddhimagga. Okay. Then we have, after reciting, you sit there and you recite the word earth. Again, kind of an innovation. You could say that's in the suttas or not, but this idea that you're using a meditation word to start your meditation is in this way is new. And you keep on watching the kasina with your eyes open and your eyes closed until you get you do that 100 times, 1,000 times, and more than that until the learning sign arises. So this is introducing the commentarial scheme of the different kinds of nimittas. You have the Uggaha nimitta, here translated as learning sign, and the Bodhisattva nimitta, here translated as the counterpart sign. The learning sign is the preliminary one, which arises in meditation and is still not full. It's a reflection of the meditation object in the mind, and it is not fully purified or stable. And when that becomes purified or stable, then that's the arising of what we call the Bodhisattva nimitta, counterpart sign, which signifies the onset of upachara samadhi. So the Bodhisattva nimitta is a sign. It's a counterpart because it's a mental image of the original meditation. So it's a mental reflection. Nimitta can also mean reflection. So it's a mental counterpart reflection of the original meditation, and it's a sign because it signifies that you're about to go into jhana. All right. Now, these ideas of the nimitta, of course, are not found in exactly the same way in the suttas, and a lot of people are of the opinion that this is some kind of new innovation in the suttas. However, it is, in my view, that the commentary is just explaining in some more detail or more specifics what's implied in the suttas. The suttas are constantly using the imagery of light when it comes to meditation. The mind in meditation is said to be radiant. The mind is pariyodhata, is bright. The luminosity of the mind, the perception that you is said to perceive light and have vision of forms in meditation. And all of these are obviously talking about something that in some way is the same kind of thing as the nimitta experience that Visuddhimagga is talking about. Of course, not every detail necessarily is exactly the same, but it's not talking about something that's fundamentally different. And the association of light with meditation is absolutely fundamental to the sutta conception, so much so that the word jhana, in fact, is, I believe, deliberately chosen because it's ambiguous, because it means on the one hand a steady state of mind, and on the other hand it means an illumination or a brightness or a flame. And the word samadhi, in fact, seems to have the same two connotations. It means both like a collecting and a coalescence, but it also means a kindling or inflaming. So the ideas of meditation as being the arising of a great light is fundamental to the language that the sutta is using throughout when it's talking about meditation. Some of the details here are interesting, like some of the kind of the specifics. After getting the learning sign, you should no longer sit in that place, but should return to your own quarters and go and develop it sitting there. But in order to avoid the delay of foot washing, a pair of single-soled sandals and double-soled sandals are too luxurious, right? Single-soled sandals and a walking stick are desirable. So you put your sandals beside your seat so you can put them on and walk back to your hut and continue meditating in peace. I think the reason why they're doing it outside, they're beginning the kasina meditation outside, is just because of lighting. I think in the huts in those days, because the lighting wouldn't have been very easy to see them. So you sat outside to actually see the visual meditation and then moved inside to continue it. The mind becomes concentrated with access concentration and the counterpart sign arises. We're now on section 4.31. The difference between the earlier learning sign and the counterpart sign is this. In the learning sign, any fault in the kasina is apparent, but the counterpart sign appears as if breaking out. So if you're contemplating a kasina and there may be like a disc of earth for the earth kasina, and if there's like a crack in it or an imperfection in the colouring, then the learning sign will reflect that, but the counterpart sign does not. It appears as if breaking out of the learning sign, and 100 times, 1,000 times more purified, like a looking glass disc drawn from its case, like a mother of pearl dish well washed, like the moon's disc coming out from behind a cloud, like cranes against a thundercloud. Like cranes against a thundercloud. Great imagery here, but it has neither colour nor shape, for if it had, it would be cognizable by the eye, grows susceptible of comprehension by insight, and stamped with the 3 characteristics, but it is not like that. For it is born only of perception in one who has obtained concentration, being a mere mode of appearance. All right, so it's saying that it's a mode of appearance. It's sanyaja, born of perception. Now it goes on to talk about the 2 kinds of concentration. The mind becomes concentrated on the plane of access by the abandoning of the hindrances, and on the plane of attainment by the manifestation of the jhana factors. The factors are not strong in access. Because they're not strong, then the mind now takes aside its object and now re-enters the life continuum, just as when a child is lifted up and put on its feet, it repeatedly falls down. But the factors are strong in absorption. It is because they're strong that when absorption concentration has arisen, the mind, having once interrupted the flow of the life continuum, carries on with a stream of profitable impulsion for a whole. That's basically just the stream of that jhana consciousness for a whole night and a whole day. Just as a healthy man, after rising from his seat, would stand for a whole day. So this is talking about the difference between the 2. Again, of course, upachara samadhi not found in the suttas. Also, another thing which I should remark, which before we looked at the different kinds of meditation, 40 kinds of meditation, and the Visuddhimagga distinguishes them by saying that certain of these lead to absorption and certainly only lead to upachara. For example, the 6 recollections only lead to upachara samadhi. That distinction is not found in the suttas, obviously, since upachara samadhi isn't found in the suttas. And on the contrary, the suttas clearly describe buddhanusati and the other recollection meditations as leading to jhanas, and the language that the suttas use to talk about these is quite unambiguous. So this aspect of the Visuddhimagga's analysis, I think, has to be rejected. I don't believe why, since the 4 jhanas are right samadhi, why on earth would the Buddha teach any meditation that didn't lead to right samadhi? Okay, now according to the Visuddhimagga, once the counterpart sign has arisen, so the counterpart sign arising is like a powerful and transformative experience. It's like it's like in your meditation you've had a light before, which is like a flickering lamp, or like a bit of moonlight or something like that, and then now it's like the sun has arisen. It's this powerful impression which is just shoves all of the darkness and all of the delusion out of the mind, and the mind is filled with light. And it's a very powerful experience. But there is that, even though the suttas don't talk about upachara specifically, but there is that kind of moment or that period of kind of a transition, which I believe is what they're talking about. And so the Visuddhimagga says that you should just be very careful about guarding the counterpart sign. It goes on to give another extensive discussion of different things you can do to guard it, which I will skip over. I'll look just briefly at some of the descriptions of the jhana factors. So there's a famous description of Vitakka and Vichara, here translated by Nyanamoli as applied thought and, applied thought and sustained thought. Elsewhere he used initial and sustained application. Though sometimes not separate, applied thought is the first compact of the mind in the sense that it is both growth and inceptive, like the striking of a bell. Sustained thought is the act of keeping the mind anchored in the sense that it is subtle with the individual essence of continued pressure, like the keeping of a bell. And applied thought is like this bird spreading out its wings when about to soar into the air, and like a bee's diving towards a lotus when it is minded to follow up the scent of it. Sustained thought is quiet, being near the non-interference of consciousness, like birds planing with outspread wings after soaring into the air, and like the bees buzzing above the lotus after he's dived down towards it. Okay, so for rapture, there's a very nice and very important description of the 5 kinds of rapture, the 5 kinds of piti, which is again an elucidation of teachings found in the suttas. And these are all kinds of experiences that are commonly felt by meditators. And I think it really needs to be acknowledged that these things are realities. I mean, these things, you know, you can say, well, the Buddha didn't teach the 5 kinds of rapture, but who cares? These are things that meditators actually experience, like all the time. The meditation minor rapture raises the hairs on the body. Momentary rapture is like flashes of lightning. Showering rapture breaks over the body again and again like waves on the seashore. And these all describe experiences which most meditators have. Paranapiti, the pervasive rapture, of course, being the important one. Sukha is the relationship between rapture and sukha is described in section 4.100. That is between happiness and bliss. Happiness is the contentedness of getting a desirable object, and bliss is the actual experiencing of it when got. Where there is happiness, there is bliss, but when there is bliss, there is not necessarily happiness. If a man exhausted in a desert saw or heard about a pond on the edge of a wood, he would have happiness. If he went into the wood's shade and used the water, he would have bliss. So this is a nice description of the distinction between these 2 things. Goes on to talk about the jhana formula, upasampajja viharati. And note that with viharati, where are we now? 70 kinds of piti. So we've actually, I'll actually skip back. Sorry, I skipped over inadvertently a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Briefly, in section 74 to 78, is that right? 74 to 78, we have a discussion of the jhana in terms of the Abhidhamma theory of mind moments, and it talks about the jhana experience being just a single mind moment. I really don't understand that passage, and I don't know what it's talking about, but elsewhere in the Visuddhimagga it teaches jhana as being a sustained experience, which obviously it is. I just thought I'd mention that. Then there's the section on section 79, which I missed inadvertently, which talks about the introduction to the jhana formula, viviccheva kamehi, vivicca akusalehi dhamehi, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome or unskillful things. And it describes the seclusion, viviccheva kamehi, should be described as in the Visuddhimagga describes it as being both the external senses and the internal desire for those senses. Now, the background to this is that in the suttas, the word karma is used in both of those different ways. Sometimes it's used to talk about the 5 external senses, the pancha karma guna. Sometimes it's talked about the desire for those senses, the karma chanda. In the beginning of the jhana formula, it says viviccheva kamehi, secluded from sense desires, and of course this also is controversial because there are a lot of people these days who think that you can be sitting there and experiencing everything through your 5 senses and still be in jhanas. The Visuddhimagga, and these people argue that the Visuddhimagga, that the sutta experience says you can experience senses but just not attached to them. The problem with that argument is, of course, that if you're not attached to them, why can't you let them go? I mean, it's pretty simple, really. If I'm not attached to this house that I'm in, it doesn't mean anything if I can't just walk out of the door. If you're not attached to your senses, let your senses go. Show that you're not attached to them. If you can't let go of your senses, it's only because you're attached to them. That's what attachment means. So the idea that we can make this fundamental distinction is illusory. Furthermore, in the suttas, when the word karma is used in the plural, it usually, perhaps invariably, refers to the external five senses. So in the beginning of the jhana formula, it says, viviceva kamehi, secluded from the senses. When it's talking about the desire for that, it's a singular. It's the desire for the five senses, the singular desire for the plural five senses. So the fact that in the jhana formula it's in plural strongly implies that what's meant there is in fact seclusion from the five senses. So these arguments which some people make that the Visuddhimagga is teaching something substantially different from the suttas, I believe that arises from a misinterpretation of what these suttas are saying. Okay, so we'll skip ahead to chapter. Now, there's many interesting things and many interesting descriptions of meditation, but we're coming near to the end of this talk. I'll skip ahead to briefly touch on breath meditation, which of course is perhaps the most common kind of meditation. And there's a lot of details that are given here, descriptions about focusing on the tip of the nose to meditate. This instruction not found in the suttas, but it's drawn from the Abhidhamma text, the canonical Abhidhamma text, which are already saying that one should focus at the nasikagga, the tip of the nose. Also, many of the kind of skillful means and methods that we use for breath meditation are found here, like say counting the breath, for example. Again, not found in the suttas, but introduced here as a skillful means to help the student to get to master the meditation. And another interesting detail which is talked about here, which again is something that's experienced commonly among meditators. While other meditation subjects may become clearer at each higher stage, this one does not. In fact, as he goes on developing it, it becomes more subtle for him at each higher stage, and it even comes to the point where it is no longer manifest. So this is something which is common experience in meditators, that the breath just disappears, and here it's talked about. So this is different from the experience of fourth jhana, where the breath doesn't exist anymore. Here the meditator is still breathing very softly, but they're not aware of it. When it becomes unmanifest in this way, the bhikkhu should not get up from his seat and go away. What should he do? He should not get up with the idea, shall I ask the teacher? For so doing, he would disturb his meditation. He should go on sitting and substitute the place normally touched for the actual breaths as the object of contemplation. In other words, you just keep applying, you keep sustaining your attention in the same way, even though the breath appears to have disappeared. And that's an important stage in the development of breath meditation. Okay. They talk about the arising of the nimitta in the context of breath meditation. Now, the word nimitta, we already talked about how this is an innovation in the suttas, and usually it's understood as being a light that appears, an innovation in the Visuddhimagga, usually understood as being a light that appears in the mind when you reach that point of meditation. It's worth noting, and I pointed this out many years ago in my first book, A Swift Pair of Messengers, that the word nimitta, when it's used in the suttas, in the context of meditation, never means a light that's arisen in meditation that way. In the suttas, the word nimitta is used in the sense of the characteristic of the mind. And the nimitta means essentially an aspect of your experience which, when you pay attention to it, promotes the growth of similar or related qualities. So the samatha nimitta, the sign of tranquility, is that which you pay attention to in order to promote the growth of tranquility. The samādhi nimitta is that which you pay attention to promote the growth of samādhi. The paggaha nimitta, the sign of exertion, is that which you pay attention to in order to promote the growth of energy, and so on. the meaning of the word nimitta has shifted from the suttas to the commentaries, and it's important to retain those different senses, otherwise you constantly get them confused. In the same way as the word kasina has changed its sense. All right. Here it has an interesting discussion of the appearance of the breath nimitta. When he does so in this way, the sign soon appears to him, but it is not the same for all. On the contrary, some say that when it appears, it does so to certain people, producing a light touch like cotton or silk cotton or a draft. Again, very common experience in meditators, that feeling like in your breath, like feeling like it's this kind of cotton, very silky, smooth feeling. But this is the exposition given in the commentaries. It appears to some like a star or a cluster of gems or a cluster of pearls, to others with a rough touch like that of silk cotton seeds. Seems a bit weird, but okay. Or a peg made of heartwood. Okay. To others like a long braid string or a wreath of flowers or a puff of smoke. To others like a stretched out cobweb or a film of cloud or a lotus flower or a chariot wheel or the moon's disk or the sun's disk. This, and it goes on, explains this single meditation subject appears differently because of difference in perception. It is born of perception, its source is perception, it's produced by perception, that when it appears differently, it is because of difference in perception. Interesting discussion on the different way that the nimittas appear, and so the Visuddhimagga is clearly trying to represent the diversity of that meditation experience. Rather than imposing like one way that the experience has to happen. And there is just one more detail that I want to mention before wrapping up, and that is a discussion in section 8.218. When the sign has appeared in this way, the bhikkhu should go to the teacher and tell him, "Venerable Sir, such and such has appeared to me." But, say the Digha reciters, the teacher should say neither "this is the sign" nor "this is not the sign." After saying "it happens like this, friend," he should tell him, "Go on giving it attention again and again." For if he was told it is the sign, he might become complacent and stop short of that. And if he was told it was not the sign, he might get discouraged and give up. So he should encourage him to keep giving it his attention, but without saying either. So again, this is guidance for meditation teachers. So the Digha reciters say basically you shouldn't confirm when they reach that stage of meditation. But the Majjhima reciters say he should be told, "This is the sign, friend. Well done. Keep giving it attention to it again and again." So obviously there's a difference of opinion among the monks, and fair enough. I don't think these are absolutes. Personally, I don't like to sort of talk about or confirm the attainments of people, because I do think that ego gets in the way of meditation very, very easily. And that, I think this is rampant in the Buddhist world. And I think that we live in a society where we have been promised and conditioned that we deserve everything, and that if we want it enough, we can have it, and that our desires are something that rightfully should be satisfied, and that if we don't, then there's something wrong with the world, not necessarily something wrong with us. And as a result of that, I believe that the field of Buddhist meditation is rife with overestimation and conceit. I think it is rampant throughout Buddhist circles, and I think that most of the people who are going around telling people that they've got jhanas and telling people that they've got these different states of meditation and so on, most of those people don't have anything even vaguely like the kinds of things that they're talking about, but they are caught up in the web of conceit and delusion. It's very hard to give those things up once you have become trapped by them. I had a friend when I was a young monk in Thailand. He was a Sri Lankan monk. Long story short, this Sri Lankan monk had meditated very diligently when he was first ordained, and he believed he became an arahant. He set up a meditation school and was teaching others. He decided after some time that he wanted to develop psychic powers. So he went to see another teacher and to say to the teacher, "Look, I want to develop my psychic powers." And that teacher said to him, "Have you ever meditated before?" He said, "Well, yes." He said, "Well, to what extent have you meditated?" And he said, "Well, I am an arahant." And the teacher said, "All right." And so gave him some meditation exercises to see where his practice was at. As a result of which, that monk realized that he not only wasn't an arahant, but he wasn't even a stream enterer, and he wasn't anything at all. When he found that out, he went back to his monastery and his meditation center. He told his students that. He said, "I'm sorry, I was deluded. I thought I was enlightened, but I'm not. And I thought that you could rely on me as your teacher to get enlightened, but you can't. So please go home, keep practicing. I'm going to go away and develop my meditation further." And that, to me, was a sign of humility, and that's the sign of a good practitioner. That's somebody who is really diligent. This is not about, meditation is not about what you get and what you attain. It's not about being able to present as having this or having that. It's about letting go of suffering. And for those of us who are practicing the Dhamma, it's up to us to be able to see where is our pride, our conceit, our attachment working, and how can we let go of those things. And what we see constantly through these teachings in the Visuddhimagga is this very, especially in this section on meditation, is this very careful attention to detail, this very careful attention to process, this very careful attention to the causes and conditions that are going to lead to that result. And we see a respect for the humility and the flexibility of mind and the openness of mind to be able to genuinely understand and abandon one's own flaws and faults, and to be able to develop and realize the deeper and more profound dhammas of the path. When we talk about samadhi, make no mistake, we're talking about things that are very, very subtle. We're talking about things that throughout history, in India, the sages have left their home and gone into the mountain and sat in caves in the Himalayas for decades to practice and try to realize. To imagine that somehow we've got the secret, we've got the goods, that we can do a bit of a meditation retreat here and there and do half an hour's meditation a day or a couple of hours meditation a day, and we're going to realize the same state as they did without doing all of that preparation, all of that letting go, all of that renunciation, and all of those things. I'm sorry, it's just kind of delusional. Let's get over that, ladies and gentlemen. Let's move ahead. The path of meditation is for letting go. Whether we can realize samadhi and jhanas now, next week, this life, next life, is irrelevant. What's relevant is how much can we let go. If we're attached to our conceit, if we're attached to our desires, if we're attached to the things that we can't let go of, that's what's leading to suffering. The purpose of meditation is to help us let go of those things. That's all. Because those things are leading us to suffering. And if we can let go of those things, then the more we can do that, the more that the mind will be light, and the more that meditation will flow easily. So let's stop being so worried about who's got this and who's got that, and what attainment is this and what attainment is that, and all of these kind of endless discussions. And I can guarantee you that anybody who's discussing these things at length on internet forums, including our own sort of central internet forum, anyone who's discussing that at length on those forums doesn't have those things. Because the people who genuinely have meditation and wisdom know that this is not the appropriate way to be talking about these things. These things are very sacred. They're very still. They're very holy. They are things that should be brought up and discussed on a personal level in the right way at the right time with the right person. They're not things that should be broadcast out to the internet as a matter of consumption by just anybody who comes across them, because they will be misunderstood, they will be misinterpreted, and they will fuel conceit and attachment. So this is my little chat for you on the subject of the Visuddhimagga section on samadhi. I've gone a little bit over time, and I apologize for that. And I wish that you are all happy and stay safe during this pandemic and during the time that we're in. And I look forward to discussing this chapter with you. And also I look forward to next week's episode, which will be on wisdom, and in which I will primarily focus on the Visuddhimagga's analysis of dependent origination.